Welcome to Level Up Your Online Teaching with New and Almost New Canvas Tools. Thank you for spending some of your valuable time, whether you are here live or watching the recording. Today, I'm going to talk about and demonstrate changes that you can do in Canvas right now in Los Rios to help you teach and to help your students learn. I will pause throughout and ask to see if you have questions, but as you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. And I'm also going to end with a link to some resources about the things I'm talking about today, and that'll have step-by-step guidance on how to do all these things. I have 8 things to talk about and to show you today. 2 of them are outside of Canvas, and 6 of them are inside of Canvas. And I'm going to talk about and again try to demonstrate each of these for you. Um, the first one that's outside is the Canvas S user. In case you don't know, we have each of us has a student user. It's an actual user account in Los Rios that is within that we can use to add to Canvas to our courses to see what things look like from the student perspective. I've actually got 3 slides talking about this, and I'll again do the demonstration. Um, these are the steps here. Basically, you have to enroll the user in your Canvas course. They're not there automatically. The course has to be published in order for this user to see it. And then you can log out. You log out of Canvas or open a new browser window to log in. And then you use that Canvas S account. The username is your username. It's a W, but instead of a W, it's an S. So S plus your employee ID number. And the way that we access this accounts, the way that we log in as the S user has changed. It's actually changed over the summer when we got Okta. So that's the kind of the big thing that's different here. We've actually had the S user since as long as we've had Canvas. So I'm going to go into my sandbox course I've got set up for today. And if I look at the people page, I see I've got my hobbits are there. My trusty hobbits are so friendly and helpful to me. But I'm going to add my S user. So again, this is the process that we would use. Anytime you're manually enrolling someone in a Canvas course in Los Rios, we use the login ID, not the email address. And that login ID is S plus my employee ID number. I'm going to, of course, make it to students, and then I'll hit the next button. It'll recognize it. You see the name there. It's got the word student in front of my name. I'll click add users. Because this is a manual enrollment in Canvas, then this user has to accept the enrollment. So they get an email address that also shows up inside Canvas. So now I'm going to show you how to log in as this user inside Canvas. Oh, wait, I forgot one step. I need to make sure my course is published because this is a true student user, or I should say it's a true user. And because they're enrolled as students, they can't see the course unless it's published. So I'll go back to my course homepage and I'll publish it. Okay, so now I'm going to log out of my Canvas account. And the page I want to go to is our Okta dashboard. So hopefully you have seen this page before. It's where when we log in for Los Rios, we have access to all kinds of tools that are tied to our Los Rios username. Canvas, of course, is there. Outlook Mail is there. We have our Google account. There's a bunch of other stuff that's there. But the change that was required because we switched to Okta for our authentication is that we have to use basically as a script to log into a system like Canvas using any other user outside of our default, our W user. So I'll say this and kind of show you one more time. If I go to, actually, I'm not sure if it'll work because I'm already logged into Okta, but if you go to lrccd.instructure.com, right, that's our Canvas URL for our Canvas instance, and you get the username and password, the only user you can use to go through that process is your usual W user. So that's the same thing that our students do, that we do when we're teaching classes. But if you want to use another user that you have access to, like you do, you actually have to use the tile that's on the Okta dashboard. So you can see here, one of them is called the Canvas S account. When I click on that, it takes me into Canvas, logs me in, and I should see a course invitation at the top of my page. I do. You've been invited to join Spring 26 Sandbox. Woohoo! I will accept the invitation. And now this student user is enrolled in the class. There it is right there. And now I can interact with this Canvas course as if I were one of my students. And again, this is a true independent user. I can access third-party tools that might be linked from here. The only things that I won't be able to access, that I should say will be a challenge for me to access, are things that require my email address to authenticate, right? If it's a third-party system, because my email address hasn't changed. I'm still me. This is still my user within Los Rios. I don't have a separate email address, in other words, for the S student user. But now I'm there, and now I can again take classes. Sorry, take classes. Can't take classes. I can complete assignments. I can participate in discussions. I'm like any other student in the class, so they could see my discussion posts. I can grade myself, right? So I want to go ahead and mention that. And the main thing about including that today is that the process that we use to access this is a little bit different because of Okta. Let me come back to my presentation. Actually, I'm going to log out because I'm going to go back into Canvas as me. Okay. And I have a couple more slides that are about this that I want to talk about. And it looks like when I log out as my S user, it kind of logs me back in as my W, right? This is my normal my normal user. Okay, so I'll leave that up there. So I covered this. I'm going to go to again a couple of slides that are about this topic, and then I'll pause for questions. Oh, I should say one more slide about this topic. That is the S account. Um, as you may know, there is also a test student user that is part of Canvas. That's part of Instructure's tool set that they provide us, that everyone who uses Canvas anywhere in the world, there is a test student user that's built into the Canvas course. I've got a table here listing the differences between these two users. The best thing that I like about the Los Rios S user is that ability to test third-party tools to kind of get a look at other things that I might have connected to Canvas. The best thing I like about the test student user, actually, there are two best things. One is the course does not have to be published, so I can use my test student user to explore my course. I actually do this before I hit the publish for my actual classes. Is I make sure that all the links are good. If a student's clicking on it, right, I don't want there to be any dead links or links that are not that go to unfinished parts of the course. And what's also a part of this is that the test student user, so this is Canvas's user, you can reset that at any time. So you could take a quiz and get a score and see the score in the grade book. You could submit a paper and interact with it as a teacher. And then if you're like, all right, I want to try that again, you can hit the reset button. The Los Rios S user is a true user, and Canvas is written to privilege student access to information or student activity. It's hard to, like, you can't delete student submissions, for example. So that's part of that. Those are some of the differences there. All right, let me go ahead and pause here, and I'll take a look at chat. And if anyone has any questions about the Canvas the test student user. Mike, I think you asked the question and then I answered it. That looks like what I see in the
Um,
chat.
Hi, Greg. You may
Yeah.
have covered this in the beginning, and I might have been like not fully engaged, like right at the start. So I just want to make sure when I change my view to student view, um, is I know that a student view is just the view, but the S user allows me to navigate more and get a better picture.
Um, yeah,
Just
I think
making sure.
Yeah, thanks for asking it. The way to activate the test student user, that can the one that's native to Canvas, is to hit the button that says Test Student View. And when
Right.
you do that, you're activating the test student user. To answer your question, Dave, you cannot delete the test students, but you can reset it and reset it in effect to act as a deletion. What I've noticed in my own exploration of Canvas is when I'm working with a course where there aren't yet students enrolled, right? So if it's prior to 1 week before the start of the term, the like if I look at the grade book or I want to look at the speed grader, I think that's hard to look at unless there's an actual student in the class. And then sometimes I'll just click on that link to view as student, and then boom, it'll activate the test student user. And then there's like a couple of little detail things that I can't access. Yeah, thanks for asking that question. Okay, let me move on. and talk about the other thing that's outside of Canvas. So this is in the Instructure community. I've got the URL on the page there, community.instructure.com. In case you don't know, the Instructure community is where Instructure hosts all of the Canvas guides. So all the documents on how to do this, how to do that, are hosted in the Instructure community. It's also a place where anyone can activate everyone has a Canvas community user and they can activate that. And once you're active, you can do things like engage, share resources, ask questions. There's a process within the community for Instructure to gather feedback from clients, from their users rather, not their clients, from their users on improvements that we want to make to the that we want to make to Canvas to make Canvas better. So that's all. That all requires activation of your user account, but you can go to the community without activating the user account. All the resources are there. When I send my weekly This Week in DE at CRC email that I do for us, I like to include something from the community to talk about the stuff that's going on there. And what they've added to the community, and they beefed it up this past year, is the Panda bot. That's a little panda with sunglasses in the lower right hand corner of the screenshot here. I'm going to open up the community and show you what that looks like. But the Panda bot basically is a chatbot that's built into the community, and you can use that to ask any questions about how to do things in Canvas. And it can be from very basic, like how do I create an announcement, and you can try to get some more sophisticated answers to questions. They collect feedback on how to use it. It remembers. So I've activated my Canvas community user. You can see that in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little picture of me. There's a bell with a number. So I've got notifications because I followed, users or certain areas in the community. And the PandaBot, because I'm logged in, it remembers my chats. So I can go back and look what I asked about. Let me take a look. So I had a question here. How do I give students a choice between two assignments? Because I'm trying to give my students that choice. And it answered the question for me. It also gave me a link to the Canvas user guide that describes that. I find PandaBot to be really helpful. It's the first place that I go when I can't remember how to do something, or I'm trying to remember, how do I do something in Canvas? And the reason I do that is because it always includes a link to the Canvas guide. It's possible that the PandaBot in the future will include its references, will include the resources that are shared by other users in the community. It doesn't do that now. It's strictly limited to the Instructure, kind of the official documentation for how to do stuff, but it is very helpful, and it might even be more helpful in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and share that resource. Yeah, and any questions on that? I include a reference to this it's in my email signature, I think, that I send to every email.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is not about the second part of your presentation, but I missed that part. What's the usage of S user? You mentioned how to create it, but I'm just curious.
Oh, why would I use the S user, the Los Rios
Yeah,
S
yeah,
user?
yeah.
Um, mainly because it allows you to use non-Canvas tools. So you can use it to explore, like if you have third-party tools that are connected to your course, that's kind of the main purpose. That's a weakness of the test student user, is it doesn't exist outside of the course where it is, right? And yes, it has an ID number. Technically, it exists within Canvas, but from Canvas, it can't access anything. Now, it can go to websites, of course, because that's just clicking on a link to open a browser. But if you have a publisher tools is a good example. I mean, there's some other third-party tools that require interaction. The Los Rios S user is the best way to test that out from the student perspective. I suppose you could use another email address, like if you've got other email addresses, to create a user account in that third party system, but that other email address, right, that other user you've created won't be able to access it from inside Canvas.
So that's only possible after publish the Canvas course.
Right. And that's
So
that's the
you
weakness,
you
right?
cannot check before semester start, right?
Basically, that's right. Yeah. Unless you use a
Okay.
test student user, but it's
Yeah. Okay.
the third party tool versus the native Canvas tools, right? There is a This S user bridges most of the gap,
Yeah.
but it is crucial that the thing, the bridge has got to be open. The course has got to be
Yeah,
published.
because sometimes I need to check before the semester starts, so I'm just asking. Yeah.
Yeah. And the test student user is perfect for that. Again, as long as the stuff that you're doing is inside Canvas.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks for asking that question. All right. Let's move into the stuff that is inside of Canvas. And I'm going to do one thing before I do that, and that is do a time check, not for how much long we have left, but what time I'm supposed to end. Got it. Okay. Um, so these are things that are inside of Canvas, and I've got a separate slide for each of these. The first one I want to talk about is differentiation tags. Um, think of these as groups that are invisible to students. If you want to group your students together, and I'll give you a use case, something that I do every semester in a moment, but if you want to group students together using the groups tool inside Canvas, that creates for each group a kind of mini course that the students have access to, that we have access to. The mini course gets added to their global navigation. There's a groups button that appears as soon as they're enrolled in a group. And within the mini course, everyone is equally able to create discussions and announcements and upload files. And so it's set up with the intent to support student to student collaboration on projects, right? Giving them the group space. I always worry about the ability to, or I should say one other thing about the groups is that if you do a group discussion, so you create groups, right, for discussion, that you have to create groups in order to do that. And so this mini group course will have the group discussions from your class. They're all there for that one group, but there could be additional discussions that are added where, students can do that. They can add discussions. They can't remove the discussions that we create. And then there can be announcements in that group space. And I've always been worried about that because I've used groups for a long time, sometimes for group projects, for others for other reasons. And I've always worried that the students might be confused because there's a second space and what do we do with the space and all that. I'm careful with my directions for my students. I've actually never had students complain about it. I've never had students express confusion, but I know that risk is there. And so I really like differentiation tags because I can meet the same interest from my perspective, and that is dividing my class into smaller groups, and use those differentiation tags like you can use groups to manage student access to Canvas items. So there could be a discussion or a module, it could be a quiz. And so I'll give you the use case that I'm going to do this semester of my first time using differentiation tags, and I have used groups before, is I teach, so I teach history. My enrollment cap is 45. I have in the past been teaching 2 classes at a time, and I cross-list my classes because I'm usually teaching the same course. And so I've got 90 students in a class at the beginning of the semester. That's a normal for me. I have 90 students in one Canvas course. And that's way too many people to have on a discussion. That is ridiculous. It's unfair to the students to expect them to, read, they reply to the discussion. I want them to reply to classmates. And, I could have one for each discussion. I could have maybe more than 200 posts, which is, I think that's unfair and that's ridiculous for them. So a few years ago, I started dividing my class into groups for the sole purpose of making discussions manageable on their end. There's a little tiny bit of hassle on my end when it comes to viewing the discussions. I have to view each group discussion separately. Grading is the same. There's no difference there. And I've asked my students in my classes, I've said, hey, do you like having fewer students on discussion boards? And overwhelmingly, their answer is yes. They feel like they're in a better community if there are fewer people that they're responding to. Another benefit for students is that over the course of the semester, as they're engaging they're engaging discussions, they're engaging with their classmates, the same people. So they kind of form a stronger connection with each other, which is great. I really like that from the responses that I see them replying to each other. So instead of using groups now, I'm going to try to do differentiation tags. I'm going to use it for the first time this semester. That will have some kind of follow-on consequences for how I do my course design, which I'll describe as I demonstrate here. So why don't I go ahead and just demonstrate that? The way to do differentiation tags is, oops, wrong button, is on the course homepage. Sorry, not the course homepage, on the people page. That's where it is. On the people page, and you can tag students, right? There's a manage tags button here that's there on all of our people pages in Canvas. I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to create two groups here. I'm going to just do my hobbits, not my S student user. And I'm going to create one group that's going to be the Baggins, and then the other one's going to be the Gamgees. So I'm going to select those two students, tag as, create a new tag. Haven't created that one yet. I'm going to call this one Baggins, and I'm going to make a tag set. So let's add another tag, and that's going to be called Gamgee. Students don't see any of this. They don't see the names of the tags. They don't see that they're grouped together, all that. So that's what I kind of like. Because I'm creating two tags here, I have to give it a tag set name. I'm going to call this Hobbit Families and hit save. Okay. Now I'm going to take those other two Hobbits, Eleanor and Sam, and I'm going to tag them as, and you can see here, right, I've created the tags. And so now I'm able to select students and then select the tags. They are Gamgee. Boom. Okay, so how do I know that my students are tagged? Well, let me refresh this page. Do they put an indicator on the page itself? No, they don't. But if I select Manage Tags, I can see here that I've got the Gamgee tag has two students and the Baggins tag has zero. So I need to retag those students, no problem. So let me select Frodo and Lobelia and tag those two as Baggins. Okay, so great, I've got this, yay. Now what I can do is I can go to a tool like a discussion, and let's create a new discussion, and I'm going to call this one Baggins Family Talk. Okay, I'll put some instructions here. Connect with other members. Be nice to each other. And don't mention the ring. Okay. So, right, this is a discussion. It can be graded, it can be not graded. That's fine. What I want to do to assign access down here is instead of making it to everyone, I'm going to change this and say it's only going to be, if I just start typing the names, you see there where it says Baggins under the tag section. I'll select Baggins. I'll hit save and publish. And now this discussion here is only accessible to students who have been tagged as Baggins. So here is the follow-on consequence, which I hypothesize that the hassle factor for me as an instructor is no worse than the hassle factor I currently deal with, or I have to view each group's discussion separately, right? Because if I have used groups for group discussion, for the good reason I mentioned before, I have to view each of those separately as I'm reading what my students are writing. Now I have to create a second discussion for each of my tags, right? For each of the tagged groups. And that means I have extra discussions to work with. But let me go ahead. I see your hand, Rachel. Let me go ahead and do one thing here. I'm going to make this a graded discussion, and then I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So let's open this up and let me edit it. And all I'm going to do is make this a graded discussion, graded, and make it worth 5 points. And hit save. And let me go ahead and ask Rachel. Yeah, what's your question?
Okay, am I unmuted?
You're
Yeah.
unmuted, yeah.
Okay, so this is really interesting to me because I do the same thing in terms of I usually have more than one section of the same course, and I cross-list them. And then for discussions, I set up two separate groups so that each section of the class has a separate discussion. So they have 40 people in there instead of 80 people, whatever. So I'd be really interesting to hear after this semester, after you've run through it, how this tagging system works out. some of what I'm hearing now, it actually sounds like more work because wouldn't I have to go through and like select everybody in one section and then put them in one category? Because I don't think my people thing can sort
That's
by section when I have students of courses cross-listed, right?
that's correct. Yeah. You can
Oh,
separate, you can limit a anything in Canvas, right? Like so this is it's modules too, but it's discussions or quizzes or whatever. Discussions I'll focus on. You can limit discussions to a section already. So you don't have to use tags to do that. And sections, unlike groups, sections are not visible to students. If the students in a group, they know they're in a group, they get a button on the global navigation, right? I mentioned the mini course that's there. Sections are invisible to students, so we could use sections for the same purpose as tags. However, sections are entirely controlled by, in Los Rios, sections are entirely controlled by the enrollment management system, by PeopleSoft, right, by e-services, and that's how students enroll in classes, right? They're technically enrolling into a section, but with tags is a way for us to control all. It's a way for us to control that interface. So I
okay.
hope
So,
that,
oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, you
Oh, so
continue.
an additional question and kind of how you were showing with the sample discussion that you set up. Um, it looked like you were just assigning that discussion to Baggins and not to Gamgee. So if I'm using that, like I basically want to divide it into two smaller groups, and I like to do it by their enrollment class section. Um, I mean, could you also, with using tags, still assign to both groups or both sections
Yeah,
that same discussion?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Julie.
Since Rachel brought up the combining courses, sorry, I lost my words there. When you cross-list your courses, in the background, do your two sections stay as separate sections within that cross-listed course?
Yes, they do.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need to
Yeah.
know. Thanks.
Uh-huh. So here's a change. I changed this to a graded discussion. And when I hit the save button, I got this warning. Are you sure you want to do this? Not everyone will be assigned to this discussion. Yes, that's exactly what I want. I click continue. So I've got a graded discussion called Baggins, and I assigned it to the Baggins tag. So any student who's tagged Baggins can see this discussion. No other students can see it. Okay, now I'm going to take this, I'm going to go back to my discussions page. I could do this on modules too, is in order to make sure that all my students get an opportunity to complete this assignment, right? I need to create a second discussion that's just for Gamgee. So I can take this discussion and from the list of items, so this could be modules, I can do this on the discussions page. I can select what I call the Atkins menu and choose duplicate. This duplicates the discussion. It's unpublished by default, which is great because of course I need to make changes. I'm going to open it and edit it. And I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it Gamgee Family Talk. And let me go ahead and change this to, so if I were doing this, like when I'm doing this in my history classes, the instructions are going to be exactly the same, right, for each of these discussions because it's the same assignment. So I'm having to do this typing right now is I wouldn't normally have to do this. And let's give them something not to talk about. Don't mention the missing cooking gear. Okay. A change I need to make here is I need to change the assignment settings. So instead of assign to, well, I didn't see that other group. I'm going to click assign to, and I'm going to assign this to the Gamgee tag. Okay, so if I click on this arrow here for the assign to dialog, what I'll see is a list of all the students in the class, right? That's there at the bottom. So if I want to assign this to an individual student or just a small set of students that I manually pick, I can from here, no problem. The sections are also listed here. So Julie, if you cross-list your classes, right, into one Canvas course, this will automatically be there, each section. And in Los Rios, the section name, right, it's a code that I think it always includes the 5-digit number, right, the 5-digit class number that students use to enroll. I think it always includes our WID number because we're the instructor for the course. And in this case, right, you don't see that there. And this is for Gamgee. So let me pick on Gamgee and hit, I didn't give it a due date before. So I'll click save and publish. And again, I get the warning, not everyone will be assigned this. Okay, great. Canvas is reminding me that not everyone will see this. Okay, here's the last thing I want to talk about this. And this is the kind of the plus minus, the, the, the kind of the plus minus of using tags versus groups is when I go to the grades page, I can see from here, just at a glance, that not every student is assigned every assignment. So Baggins Family Talk, that's that discussion that's tagged for Baggins. The only students that can even receive a score here, I can't even type a score for these others, are students for whom this thing has been assigned. And I assigned it via tags. So the Baggins tag assigned to this graded item, this graded discussion, only my Baggins students, Lobeli and Frodo, can receive a grade for this. Only they will see it. It will be completely hidden from the other students in my class. In this case, it's Eleanor and Sam. Yeah, and poor student Greg, he's not doing this at all. So whatever. Okay, I think that is my demo and keep hitting the wrong, advancing too quickly. So there's differentiation tags and the things that you can use to manage access for differentiation tags. It's not just discussions or assignments. You can also do it for content pages. You can do it for entire modules. So I think another use case might be if you have a group of students that are if you have a group of students, I'll make up something that I might see. So my history classes, right? How are my students distinguished? I know which students are under 18 at the start of the term, right? We get that. There's an asterisk attached to those students' names. So if I wanted to create content that was special for my under 18 students, then I could do that. I could create a whole module and say, hey, congratulations, you're not an adult, whatever the content is. I think that if I identify students in some other way, throughout a semester, I could do that, right? So that the tags has a lot of utility beyond beyond what I've just demonstrated here.
So
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure my understanding the difference between tags and groups. So I normally use groups, and then I have the same discussion question for all the students. So in that case, I don't need to use a tag. But if you need to assign different topic for different groups, it's better to use a tag instead of people, right? That's what
Yeah. Yeah. Let me show you. Here's a difference. I'm going to go into my history class from last fall. I'm going to try to do this without including any student names. So let me first of all go to my settings page. And this will hopefully be familiar to those of you who have done cross-listing. If I go to my sections, right, here are my two sections that are cross-listed into this one class. And you can see there's, right, the section ID code's got what? It's got my employee ID number and it's got the 5-digit code. Perfect. Okay. So now if I go to my discussions, so it's going to be the same for all of them, not Q&A, everyone's in that. But if I click on, let me do this. I'm going to stop share for a moment, just so I can make sure that I don't, since I'm recording and I'm going to post this, I want to make sure I don't share any student names here. Okay, perfect. Let me re-enable sharing, and then I can do this. So this discussion we're looking at is it's the first discussion in my class. It's my identity introduction, and this is a group discussion. And because it's a group discussion, I get this button at the top that says group discussion. On this discussion itself, because I managed to do this correctly, there aren't any posts. There are no replies to this discussion because every single student in my class was already enrolled in a group before I created the discussion. And so therefore, when they log in, they only see their group discussion. I, of course, can see all of them because I'm the professor. And so how I access those is on my discussion page at the top, there's a button that says group discussion. And if I click on that, I'll see a link for each of my groups and I'll see a count, right, of read or unread messages. If I go to one of those groups, so let me click on this one here, the discussion prompts, right, the top part of it is exactly the same because it's just making a copy of it. But if you look at the top of the page, you'll notice something else here. It says History 310 Discussion 1. So I'm currently in this little mini course that my students have access to. And if I click on this link here to go to the mini course homepage, right? There's no homepage in the sense like we have a homepage on our courses. It's only recent activity, but you can see the tools that are available in the mini course for Canvas. So this is again, anytime you use groups in Canvas, they get this space that only they and the instructor can access. And you can see that there are announcements that are particular to this group. I mentioned discussions, of course. Any group discussions that I create will appear here, but any user in this group can also create their own discussion if they want to. And you can see files. Collaborations is where they can set up a Google Drive, or sorry, a Google document that they all have access to. And of course, the people is a listing of the people who are in that group. The problem that I have with this is that when I'm viewing the discussion and I want to go back to another discussion, I have to click on this link here to go back to the course. And then I can go back, right? Then I can go back to discussions, and it's basically a little bit clunky. The advantage of using this system is that on the grades page, I only have one grade column for this assignment, right? There's one grade column called, not this assignment, the identity introductions, or the learning identity, and all of my history versus history discussions. There's one column for each of those because all my students are taking that right there in the same assignment. It's just divided by groups. With tags, what I'm going to have is I'll have a lot more columns in my grade book. I usually have 70 or 80 assignments in a class anyway. So if it's going to be 100 instead of 80, or maybe 110, I don't know that I'll notice that difference. I typically don't navigate via the grade book anyway, but that's a good thing. That's a good thing to be aware of. The other thing that I like about this is I mentioned before, because I have my students divided into groups and they stay in the same group for the whole class for the purposes of the discussions, it's really important that I put my students into groups before they start using the discussion tool. And the reason is that this main introduction, right, the one that's not the group discussion, if a student is not enrolled in a group, they will see this discussion. They can see the reply button. They can, type something, but no one else will see it except for me, because there are no students who can see this discussion because the students are all enrolled in groups. So there are some things that I've done in my own course design that I'm kind of looking forward to not having to do, because the tag discussions, like I have in this class, right? If I haven't yet tagged the students, like I haven't yet tagged student Greg, my student user, then that student will never be able to complete this particular assignment. And that's, either that student or I at some point will notice that, and will then, then I can take the corrective action. Okay. Great question. All right, let me move on to the next thing. This is also connected to discussions, and this is checkpoints. For those of us who've been teaching online for a while, the kind of traditional online discussion assignment is something like, here's a prompt. Students, I want you to reply to this prompt, and I want you to reply to your classmates. One of the early things that happened in the early years of doing discussions is we would, and I've experienced this as a teacher, is if I make a due date, of course, my assignments have due dates. If I have a due date for the discussion, then how will students complete the reply to their classmates if their classmates haven't yet posted a reply? And of course, due dates are a strong motivator for when students actually do work. So pretty early on, those of us who use discussions kind of talk through this idea, oh, well, we'll just have staggered due dates, right? We'll say your first assignment, the reply to my post, is due on a Wednesday, and by Friday, I want you to reply to your classmates. And that was great. So that kind of solves that one problem, because we want material for students to reply to for the second part of the assignment. And then the question was, okay, if we have this, then which is the due date for the assignment? Because each assignment, up until now, each assignment can only have one due date. And so is it better to have the due date when the first post is due, or is it better to have the due date when the replies to classmates are due? And whichever one we choose, is it worth it in Canvas to go through the hassle of creating a separate calendar event that says, don't forget your replies to classmates are due today? So that's kind of a struggle that we've had for a while. I know my own practice has been to make the due date the first date that was due, right? The reply to the prompt And then I tell my students, right, within a couple of days, whatever it is, reply to classmates. Instructure has finally listened to these requests because these have been in the community for quite a while to do something to make it possible to have separate due dates for the initial reply and the reply to classmates, and they've added that, and it's called discussion checkpoints. And I've got screenshots here, and of course I'll demonstrate this for us. The top is you see the little graded checkbox, so you say yes, this is a graded discussion. As soon as you say this is a graded discussion, a second box pops up that says assign graded checkpoints. And then if you assign graded checkpoints, you then have to give a points possible to the reply to topic. That's the next screenshot on the lower left side. How many additional replies are required? So is it post once, reply twice? Is it one and one, whatever it is? And then the points possible for the additional replies. Canvas does not allow you to have, so let's say you have more than one required reply to classmates. Canvas does not allow you to separate those points, right? Reply one gets 3 points, reply two gets 3 points. You have to kind of combine those numbers together. So there are two graded items, and from the student's perspective, they see two separate assignments, and they see two separate, I believe there are two separate links in the modules page too, that kind of remind them that they have to do these things. And then the third thing to do, and this is the third screenshot, is you have to assign separate due dates, right? To reply to topic and reply to required replies due dates. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that. And I'm going to talk through some things that I've noticed as I've explored this. So if I go to my discussions, I guess I could click from there. Okay. History versus history. This is what I'm planning on working with. This is a graded discussion. My students compare interpretations. Great. Super. I have my requirements for my students, right? They have to write a reply in one paragraph. Okay. So I ask them for a 2-paragraph reply to my post. And then I ask them for reply to one or more of your colleagues' posts, right? So I'm only requiring one on the reply to classmates. And if I edit this discussion rather, it's graded. So I'm going to talk through the changes that happen as soon as I click that checkbox. So first of all, see at the bottom, it's worth 36 points and it's due on January 28th. Okay. As soon as I click assign graded checkpoints, the page is going to change. And on the graded section, no, it's in the checkpoint settings section. I lost my points. So, okay, it was 36. So I already know how I divide those points, right? Whatever that is. But I want to make sure I point that out, is that the points immediately disappear. Now, at this point, I could just hit cancel and I could come back to edit and the 36 points will be there again. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so you see it's 36. Here's the second thing that happens. And this is something I've asked Instructure to fix because I don't like this because this, you'll see, is the due date disappears as well, right? You see the due date January 28th. So as soon as I say assign graded checkpoints, okay, got it. I'm going to turn off group discussion because that's a hangover from when I copied this over. So say assign graded checkpoints, got it. Okay, points. Oh, I got to remember this. What is it? Okay, I only have one reply. I know that. So I think it's 24 and 12. Great, 36 points. It adds up the points for me as I'm going along. That's great. And then it lost the due dates. Well, let's see. What did I say in my screenshot? I think I said, there it is, January 21st, 23rd. Okay. So required going to be January 21st. Required replies due January 23rd. Save. So here's what I see on my end. If I go to the modules page, you can see this where it says history versus history. Reply to topic due January 21st. Required replies due January 23rd. Okay, great. Well, what do our students see? If I click on view a student, I don't see that, but let's see what happens if I do a post. Let me reply. Okay, let me go back to the modules page. Oh, I don't see a reply. I should see a second thing here, so that might be something to fix. But let me check the grades page because I'm gonna show you something else. So here's what I don't like about how this works for how Instructure has implemented this, and I want you to be aware because it's something to know, is on the student's view of the grades page, the due date for the discussion and the reply disappear on this column, right? The due column, but they do appear if you expand it, if you click on the caret and it expands it, and you can see the reply to topic, great, is due January 21st. Reply to a classmate is due January 23rd. Okay, that all makes sense. This works. I can see that it's ungraded because I just posted it. Here's the date that I submitted. Yay. Okay, so you may be thinking, well, Greg, that's not such a big deal. Have students click on that. The problem is that if I go up here and I say sort by date, right? Sort by due date. Well, let me switch it and say sort by module. If a student says, oh, I want to view my grades sorted by due date, it treats any discussion with replies as if it doesn't have a due date and puts it at the bottom of the list. You can see that that is actually see, that's the first assignment due in this class, right? It's due on January 21st. So it should be at the top of this list, but it's not. I reported this to Instructure, so hopefully they'll be able to fix this because that to me is fundamental. Here's where this is also a problem, though. You may think, well, Greg, how often do students sort by due date on the grades page? I don't know, but here's where they do this is on the syllabus page, because the syllabus page by default includes a date sorted list of all the assignments. And look at that, they did fix it. All right, so they fixed this since I last looked at this, which was obviously not today. So great. This makes me feel very happy that they did fix this, because I remember this was also a problem where the due dates did not show. It was treated as an undated assignment on this page. In case you don't know, the syllabus page, as I'm demonstrating now, right, it includes by default a date sorted list of all the assignments in a class. Okay.
One question, follow-up question about that. So it's gonna be two different due dates shown on the calendar, right? On
Correct.
Canvas.
That's
Okay.
right. Yeah,
That's another way student can check.
Exactly. Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the calendar. The syllabus is everything that's on the syllabus appears on the course calendar and vice versa. So if you create a calendar event, that event will also appear on the syllabus page. Yeah. Okay. So you all just witnessed professional development in real time, because that was a change. That was something I learned. They did fix that, so that makes me feel a lot better about that. But it's still a good thing to know that the grades page, as an instructor, sometimes, especially at the end of the semester when I'm trying to give a student the course grade, I like to look at all the students' work on one page. The grades page does that, and I like sorting it by date because that'll kind of help me clue in on what parts of the semester the student was more or less checked in, right, and connecting with the course. Okay, a couple of unread chat messages for me. Courtney, thanks for sharing. Gail says, would it be on their to-do list? Yes, it should be. If it's on the syllabus, it should be on the to-do list. I really like this feature. One issue I ran into last semester was that I would grade the first reply before the second reply was due. Some students panicked because the assigned temporarily showed as incomplete. Is a way to prevent this from happening so I can continue to give feedback early on before the final due date. I think the short answer, and I'm familiar with what you're saying here, is right. I think the short answer is no. It's similar to when students take a quiz that has a mixture of automatically graded and manually graded questions. The manually graded questions, right, that score doesn't get added until we grade them. So the best kind of mitigation against that is to let students know. Although one of the features that I'm going to talk about may help with that. Can rubrics still be used for grading with discussion checkpoints? Alas, no. They did say that's part of their current, hopefully that's something they'll improve as well, but they currently don't allow the rubrics to be used for that. In fact, why don't we take a look at the speed grader? I haven't done that yet. So let's go into this course. And if I go to the home page, I should have an ungraded submission. Yeah, history versus history. Super. So when I go to the speed grader for this discussion, I have the student. You can see there are separate scores separate scores for each of the for the replies to the post and replies to classmates. But the rubric can't be used to score. So if I did this and I say not yet, and I click here, save, the points don't get put through. So that's unfortunately how things are right now. That what they need to do basically is they need to write it so that there would in fact be a separate rubric for the replies to topic and replies to classmates. If I assign the rubric and want to add checkpoints, would I have to remove the rubrics? No, as you saw here, right? The rubrics are still there. They just can't be used to calculate the score automatically.
Okay, pardon, but I can fill it out so that the student can see why they got the points. I just have to.
Correct. Yeah. So I've got the,
Okay.
here's the test student. Here is a comment on criterion number 1. Let's save. Let's give the student some points here, but no points yet. And I don't need to make any comments here. So now let's see what the test student sees. Oh, what am I doing here? I don't need to hit save. Fine, I'll hit submit. Does that make anything different? Let me move on. Okay, so let's go back to the course homepage. Let's go back to view a student. Grades. So here's what the students would see, right? This is for history versus history number 1. The score is there. They have the score per assignment, right? The replies to topic and replies to classmates. And then here's the rubric itself. So if they click on this, they would see the rubric, including the comment that I typed. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. Okay, Rachel, you had your hand up?
Oh, I think you kind of answered this, but just to clarify, you can still use rubrics and you can still grade with rubrics. It's just that Canvas doesn't automatically enter the score that you've graded with on your rubric. You have to manually enter the score for the different checkpoints. Is that a correct understanding?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. I mean, that kind of solves the problem. It just takes a couple more typing in numbers, but the information is still given to the students. And in fact, more information because they get, okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
If you have two different, like first posting and then replies, but if you have a rubric for reply, the second deadline one, then you need to post another rubric too. If you have
No,
one?
there's only one rubric for the discussion.
Oh, only
Yeah.
one. Okay.
That's what I think Instructure's developers haven't figured out.
Okay.
Assuming that they have the interest in making the discussion rubric, sorry, how do I say this? Discussion with checkpoints rubric usable for calculating the score for an assignment, right? So
Yeah,
we have an
that's
interest in
a
that,
lot. Yeah.
which we have an interest in as users, and this is in the community, so there's interest in that. I think they have not yet decided how they're going to do that. I think if that were me, if I could tell them what to do, I would basically require that discussion with checkpoints, right? Require that if you're going to use a rubric for grading for a discussion with checkpoints, require that the instructor identify which criteria are linked to whether it's the reply to the post or reply to classmates. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking that's way too complicated. I just say add a second rubric. Because if it's a second item in the grades page, why not, make it each thing. Yeah. Okay, great. All right, let's see. What do I got next? After rubrics, we have after checkpoints, we have student self-assessment. So another change that we have is that for an assignment, so this is only assignments, not quizzes and not discussions. For an assignment where we have a rubric, we can enable self-assessment, which means the students can, select which rating they think that they have achieved for each of the criteria in a rubric. They can add comments just like we could add comments. And their self-assessment is something that we can see. And so we could tell. So I've done this now in my class. I think I did it. Maybe I did it twice, summer and fall. And yeah, summer and fall I did it. And it's great. I love it. And the students like it too, because they can use their, it helps them if they have to do a self-assessment, right? It helps them explore the quality of what they're submitting before, or they have to submit it first, but before, probably before I grade it, right? So I really like this. And I've got on the screen here, you can see the checkbox there, right, for enable self-assessment. You have to enable 2 feature options in order for this to work. Assignment enhancements, student and enhanced rubrics. you'll see these in a moment, but assignment enhancement student, basically, it's only for students. It changes how they interact with the assignments page. It makes things, I think it's better in some ways. The buttons get bigger and it's easier to, add files, those kinds of things. Our instructions are the same. None of that changes. Nothing changes from our end. Enhanced rubrics does change the interface of the rubrics a little bit, and you'll see what that looks like here, because in my sandbox course, I have an assignment called Edit the Textbook. And this is an assignment where my students have to, what do I tell them? They have to submit, here we go, uploading a file using, I tell them Word or PDF. So this is probably standard, assignment submission stuff. I give them the multimedia submission option if they want to do that too. And then I also have self-assessment. And I tell them this is how self-assessment works. I also tell them, what do I tell them here? Well, one thing is that self-assessment can only be done via a browser. It cannot be done on a mobile device. So that's a thing to let students know. I learned this from my students. This is over the summer. I had a student who's using their phone to take my class, which is normally fine for everything that I provide. But then I didn't know about this. The student taught me this as well. Oh, and here we go. This is something that I do manually for my students. This is after the first week, right? I tell them, self-assess your submissions. So I require them to do a self-assessment. They can't self-assess until they submit. So again, these are things for us to be aware of. Let me go ahead and continue, or actually start the demo. So the first thing I have to do, remember, is I have to enable 2 feature options. So on the settings page of a course, I go to the feature options tab. Feature options allow us to explore different tools in Canvas and changes that Instructure is working on. It is likely that most of these feature options will become requirements, or I should say, won't be options anymore at some point in the future. And depending on the feature, those things will happen one way or another. Some of them will probably always be optional, but here's the 2 things, like assignment enhancements for students that'll probably become enforced at some point in the future. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. And I think the same thing is true of enhanced rubrics. In fact, you can even see this little, I think they're called pills, that says feature preview. This lets you know this is something that Instructure is actively working on, right? Trying to make better. So I've enabled those 2 things. Now let me go back to my assignment. And now the rubric looks different, right? It's collapsed. So if I want to see the rubric, I have to click the preview button. And there's the rubric. That's the same rubric that was there before. If I'm grading submissions using the enhanced rubrics, it's basically the same. So let me go into Speed Grader. And let me pick a student. So I'll pick Frodo. I click rubric, right? This is similar to what it was before. There is a difference in that we can change it from a traditional view to either horizontal or vertical. So we could change it to vertical, right? And I've got these different buttons and it's a different appearance. I'm here for self-assessment though. So let me go back to the assignment. And you can see that I had already enabled self-assessment before, because I've been turning the features on and off, right? Getting ready for today. So Canvas remembered that. It's not on by default, right? We have to choose to make it on. So I will choose to make it on. It is available right now. Now let's see what that looks like from a student's perspective. So the student looks at the assignment. You may notice that things are different, because remember, I have assignment enhancements turned on. So the student perspective is a little bit different. The instructions, of course, are the same. I need to, there's the rubric, right, from the student's perspective. There we go. Choose a submission type. So I will choose text, and let me just put some, silly Lorem Ipsum text in there. I think the instructor said 4 paragraphs. I can't remember, whatever. I'm sure the instructor reads Latin. So the student, right, submits the file, or in this case, I fill out the text box, and there's a button there that says submit assignment. I'm going to select the button. Again, this is the student's perspective. I get the confetti. Woohoo! Now, because I've submitted, I see the self-assess button. So the student can hit the self-assess button And the student can decide, oh, well, let's see. Yeah, I think I did okay there. I did okay there. I can say something like, I'm not sure how well I did for this one. And you know what? I think I did a pretty good job overall. Yeah. Let me fill this in. Okay, only did halfway there. Okay, great. As I am doing that, now I'm in student view on this browser, so I can't see the save button. We can't see it. It's right behind leave student view. So I have to use my keyboard to tab over there and then hit the submit button. Incomplete self-assessment. Oh, I missed this one here, I guess. And maybe that one? No. There we go. There we go. What did I miss? There we go. So it requires the students to select a rating for each of the criteria. Now it says incomplete again. Okay. There we go. So as a student, I just self-assessed my submission to this assignment. Now let's see what the instructor sees. I will leave student view. Yeah, I see your question, Christine. I'll answer that. So if I go into the speed grader, my test student, right, they self-assess. So how I view their self-assessment is when I select the view rubric button, there's a button that appears here that says view student self-assessment. So I select that, and you can see that their self-selected criteria ratings are highlighted with checkboxes, with a dashed line rather. Their comments appear here, and then I can then override it in effect, right? I can select what I think they achieved. I can add some comments, of course. The way that self-assessment is currently set up is that once I submit my, well, I'll check this because this is how it was before. I think that once I submit my feedback via the rubric, the students can no longer see their self-assessment. We'll find out. So let me hit submit assessment here. It did calculate the score because I have that set up for this assignment. So let me go back to the student view and take a look at, can I view my, oh, this is the instructor's feedback. So the student cannot see, oh, I'm sorry, there it is. No. So you see where it says view rubric, right? This is from the student's view. Where it says select grader, they can view my feedback as the professor. If we had multiple graders set up, they could see the other feedback, or peer review, they could see that, but they cannot view their self-assessment after I have submitted it, right? After I have overwritten, basically my feedback overrides their their feedback. I wish that weren't true because I want students to be able to compare their self-assessment with what I tell them I think that they did, right, with my comments and all that. And that is also a request that's been made in the community, and hopefully they'll fix that. Christina, you asked a question. Do most students complete the self-assessment? Is it optional? What I did in my classes is I have in my first week of the semester, right, I have a series of assignments that are all low stakes that are partly designed for me to get information from them, but are also partly designed for them to get experience using the tools that I'm going to use to assess their learning throughout the semester. And I do have an assignment where it's not one of these heavy history assignments. Requires them to think, I hope, but it's not directly connected to the outcomes, for example. And in that one, I tell them I want you to self-assess, and I say this is how to self-assess. In my feedback to their submission on that first assignment, right, I always say thank you for using self-assessment. I hope this helps you, understand better what I'm asking for and how to demonstrate your learning. If they don't self-assess, right, when I'm not making a requirement, I tell them for future self-assessment assignments, I will require you to do a self-assessment before I give you any feedback. And then the rest of the semester, it's up to me to stick with what I told them in the first week. And then I have to decide at the end of the semester. And so there's no technical way to force them to do self-assessment. That's another request that's in the community that I hope that they will add, right? I would love that to make that a requirement as part of an assignment. So the only requirement is whether or not I enforce what I say. And what I do then, so this is how I've done this now for a couple of semesters, is as my students are doing their writing assignments, that's when I use the self-assessment. As they're doing their writing assignments, If they don't self-assess, then I message them and I say, hey, as soon as you do the self-assessment, I'll give you some feedback on this. And that prompts almost all of them to do it, right? They're like, oh, yeah, oh, sorry, I forgot. I didn't realize. Then they'll sometimes message me that. They'll do the self-assessment. I'll give them feedback. That works. That's great. There are students who don't do the self-assessment, or maybe on the very last assignment, right? They do it because they're in a rush. There's the final deadline. And then I have to decide if I'm going to use that against them. I typically don't, because for me, the exercise in self-assessment is in students thinking about their learning and how they're demonstrating what they've learned. And that's where the value is. And it's not, so I don't actually use it as punitive, although I tell them it's a requirement. Okay, let's see a couple of questions here. And let me come back to this. I know I've got 10 minutes left, so I should be good on time. Okay. Gail asks, what do you do for the student who uses mobile device and thus cannot do the self-assessment? Great. I email the students and actually, Robert, you answered my question. I would copy their self-assessment response with my response so they can see what they put along with my comments. Maybe that's the second thing. So Gail, to answer your question, and that what I did over the summer was I sent the student a message, and in my message I said, let's just do it this way. Here are the criteria from the rubric. They can see that on the mobile device anyway, but I put it in the message and I say, here are my criteria, here are the ratings. Why don't you reply to this message with your own self-assessment? So I let them, I try to make things as easier for them as possible. The first thing I say is come to campus because we have computer labs that you can use. Over the summer, I had a student who was on the phone who was like, I can't come to campus easily. That's going to be true for online students. That should be an assumption that I make anyway about online students, that they can't come to campus easily, else they would be taking in-person classes. So I kind of give them both those options. I think now what I would do is I think this did not happen over the fall semester where students said that, but I think I may jump straight to that, just sending them a message and asking to provide feedback. And then Robert, you mentioned I would copy their self-assessment response with my response so they can see what they put along with my comments. That way they can compare the two. Yeah, that's a great idea, Robert. Christine asked for the screenshot. That's what I was thinking. And then you said I would just put their self-assessment in quotes with mine in the front. Yep, that works as well. Great. All right, let me move on. Scheduled feedback release. So sticking with feedback for students, we can now decide when the feedback for students appears. We can schedule it. Before scheduling it, we have the option of we can hide feedback from students, meaning, we can type in our scores and type comments and all that kind of stuff. Students don't know it until we decide to publish it. There's the manual release. That's one of the options. But what Instructure has added is scheduling the release. So it's kind of halfway manual, halfway automatic. And I'll tell you my own experience with this. This was back when we were using D2L. So this is several years ago now. And I remember one night I was grading, and because of the quirks of my schedule, I was like grading at 2 in the morning, 1:32 in the morning, because that was when I could finally get my grading done. And I gave a student a grade. I'm hitting submit, right, whatever. And then boom, a student messaged me like at 1:30 in the morning. Hey, professor, I got a question about my grade. And at that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, what? No, I don't want to talk to students right now. I just want to get this done. I'll respond to your message in the morning. But that made me realize, and that helped me remember that from the student's perspective, they assume that we are available 24 hours a day because the classroom is available 24 hours a day. If they get feedback at any moment, they have a question at any moment, that they can ask that question. Because I happened to be online at that moment, and with D2L, if you don't know, there was a place on the people page you could see who was online at that very moment. Like there's a little button that appeared to each user's, each name. So my students knew that I was online, and therefore I had the question: do I respond to this student right now when the student needs help, or do I wait? Right. So I didn't like that, and so what I did later on was I stopped submitting grades during, I want to do it basically during business hours when I was awake, so that if students had questions, right, I could respond. And then with Canvas, I started using this manual option, right, where I would do all the grades at whatever time. And then when I was ready, typically, early in the morning, I would wake up, whatever, and then I would hit that button to publish all the grades. Now I can decide when the grades are published. And when you do that, you can split you can see here it'll separate the grades released, that's the actual score, right? The grade, and then the comments. So you can separate that out. This is what it looks like. It needs to be on the grades page. And this is something, oh, I need to leave student view. This is something you do, you have to do for each assignment if you're going to schedule it. So it's not, there isn't a bulk setting, which makes sense because our assignments probably have different due dates. But I'm going to show, before I talk about the individual assignment, let me go to the gradebook settings, and there's a grade posting policy. So this is where we were before. You can manually or automatically post grades. The default is automatically. What that means is that as soon as you put a grade in, the student immediately gets a notification, this assignment has been graded. And then they have the option to see the score as part of that notification. But for sure, they can go into Canvas at that moment and write and see what their grade is. Or you could say manually, in which case you decide assignment by assignment, right? Okay, I'm ready to post these grades. What I would do instead is I would go to perfect. This is a writing assignment, edit the textbook. So I'll select the Atkins menu for this assignment. And then one of the options here is grade posting policy. And once I select manually for an individual assignment, I then get the option to schedule release dates. So this assignment is due, I'll leave student view. Oh, due Wednesday, February 4th. Okay, so if that's due Wednesday, February 4th, what I would do is, of course, I'm not necessarily going to do this until I and know that I have time to grade, but I'm going to be optimistic. And let's say that I'll go ahead and do grades and comments together, and I'll release those. February 4th is a Wednesday. That's due Wednesday night. So you know what? I think I'm optimistic. I'm going to get the grading done by Friday morning. I don't know if that's realistic or not. Of course, I can change this at any time. And then once I hit save, and then let me give a grade to a student who hasn't been graded yet. I think once students receive a grade, we can't hide it. But now what I should see for this student who I just gave 10 points to, perfect. That little icon just popped up, which means this is a hidden grade. And then I know, again, I could edit that setting to change it so that I can edit that setting. Let me show you. Select the Atkins menu for the assignment, go to grade posting policy, and I can hit automatically and do that. Boom, just post it right now. And then now the students will get the grades right away. Okay. Yeah, Rachel.
Just actually general question I've been curious about with that, when it shows you that little eye that it's hidden in the grade book from students or a student, um, does that mean in their calculated total grade, it's not, so I'm thinking mainly like, say there's a test and I want to review it. It's part of it's automatically graded, but I don't have it released because I want to review it for each student first. So does that mean that tentative score on their test does not show up in their total until I've released the grade?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
If it's hidden, it hides the calculation totals. But let me double check that. So we're looking at
But
photos
they
grades right
still
now.
see a total, because I think it puts the hidden thing on their total column. They still see a total, but their total is different than what I would see because it doesn't include the score for that assignment.
No, they don't have a total right. You can see here the assignments group. It's not because I've got an assignment that I haven't yet graded, or I'm sorry, that I graded but not yet released, then it doesn't, they don't see their total grade. So let's double check that. Let me go to Frodo's grade. Let me make sure it's published. I don't know why he can't see it. So oops, wrong thing. Yeah, Frodo should see that score because I have it as automatically. Fine. Let me just type a new number. Okay, the I disappeared, which means all these grades are visible. So now when Frodo goes in to look at his grades, he has that still hidden. Why not? Why? Automatically post, yeah. I have quantitative data is visible to students. So that shouldn't be it. Yeah. Now I'm going to blame I don't know what I'm going to blame. Well, I'm thinking, Gail, what's your question? Hmm. Gail, you have your hand raised?
I'm sorry, I was muted because I'm in a loud place. The assignments in the navigation bar is hidden from students, so that in the grades, wherever you were, where so that little I was there across from assignments, isn't that reflecting that it's in the navigation bar, it's hidden from the sign from students?
No,
Oh, okay.
that's because that's an assignment group, right? Every course
Okay.
has to have at least one assignment group. I have it, it's just called assignments.
Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. And yeah, so all right, I think I've got one more thing to share. Actually, two more things to share. I'll go quickly. I want to share the resources too. And I'm at time already. Yuck. Okay. So I don't know what happened with the grades thing. I will hopefully re-record this and fix that. Actually, let me do one more test on that. Let's take a look at this test student user because maybe something's wrong with Frodo. And let's have the test student user view their grades. And it's hidden. Okay. So I need to fix something, and I'll worry about that in a little bit. Schedule feedback release. A couple more things. One is new quizzes now does surveys. Juana asks, is it because it's going to publish on February 6th? You know, no, because I changed it from manual to automatic, right? So if I'll select the assignment, that's one more thing to check. Grade posting policy. If I select manually, is it going to remember? No, it doesn't even remember. It doesn't even remember the date that I typed before. So that isn't that. So there's some other setting that I have that I need to figure out. Yeah, hopefully I'll get that fixed before I do the recording, before I publish the recording. Okay. So this is something I'll just talk through quickly. New Quizzes now does surveys. This was a reason not to use New Quizzes. That reason has been taken away because they now do surveys, both graded and ungraded. Why would you switch to New Quizzes? Because New Quizzes allows you to do some really sophisticated things with the questions that you ask, especially the matching and that type of question stuff. There's some really interesting things you can do. And so please look for workshops on how to use New Quizzes. But I wanted to mention that because this is a change that Instructure just made. They initially were not going to do surveys and New Quizzes at all. They actually said that when they first released it. But enough of us said, hey, no, we want surveys because surveys are important. And so now we have that. And then the final thing I'll say is I'll talk through again, and you see the screenshot here, is in comments on the speed grader, that comment box has limited formatting possibilities. They used to not have formatting at all, but a couple of years ago, they started allowing some formatting. At some points, and this was in the past semester, they also added images, math, so the equation editor and links, including course links, are now available to be added to the speed grader comments. So if you're giving a student a comment, so let's go to Frodo and take a look at the speed grader for this assignment. What you can do is you can say, okay, Frodo, check out this page for more help to improve your next submission. And I can use this button in the toolbar to say, okay, I'm going to add a link. It's going to be a course link. And the link is going to go to this page called, nope, I only have one page. The link's going to go to this quiz, right? And that should be there. Yeah, there it is. So there's now a link to the quiz. So those are enhancements that were made to the SpeedGrader comments field. Okay. Now, thank you very much for those of you who stuck around. This is the last slide. And now, wow, what does this mean? You didn't get to see the feedback link until you stuck around. So that means, are you more likely to give me positive feedback or less likely? I'm not sure. I'm going to put the link to this QR code. It's in the chat, the chat for our thing right now. There's one other thing I want to share, and I will share this with everyone because I did ask you to register, and that is a link to the resources page. I created resources that has links to the Canvas guides for all the stuff that I talked about. And that is this link right here. Again, I will actually, I'll probably email both these links out to everyone who registered. So I will say thank you again for choosing to spend this time with me today. I am Gregory Beyer, your distance education coordinator. I am grateful that you've again chosen to spend this time. I'm doing another workshop in a few minutes. I think I've got the next time slot. So I know I'm going to go to that. But before I go, any final questions or comments? Thank you, Robert. I saw that you sent me an email. Thanks, Anne Marie. I hope you have a great spring as well, of course, to everyone.